Well, hello out there in podcast land and in YouTube land. Welcome back to the Front Row Network. I am Lou Hare, and it is Selection Sunday. No, it's not that Selection Sunday. That happened earlier. We are going live tonight to talk about a bracket that maybe might anger more of you a little bit more, and that is our Ultimate 80s movie bracket. Now, if you don't remember, the way I got involved in this whole podcast network was through my 90s movie bracket, which we did last year. And we enjoyed it so much, and people seemed to really have a good time with it, that we thought, well, let's make this a yearly thing. Every March, basketball has their March Madness. We movie fans have our own March Madness. So this year, we're going to the 80s. And see, I got my 80s gear behind me. I got my Gary Coleman t-shirt on. I don't know if you can see that or not. But we are here to talk about the Ultimate 80s movie bracket. So how is this going to work? Well, we have a selection of 64 movies, which we'll get to in a minute. This Friday, live here on YouTube, and then later in your podcast feed, we will be breaking it down and duking it out to determine what is the Ultimate 80s movie. So you'll get some of your favorites from the Front Row Network making their case, going round by round through these different brackets to let you know what we think. But along the way, we want to hear from you. One of the things that we're doing this podcast for is so that you can make some comments before then. Go to our Facebook page, check out the brackets, comment on this video, and let us know what you think. Where did I get wrong? But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. What movies made the cut? How did we come up with this science? Well, we movie on a couple of different things. First of all, we look at the decade as a whole, and there's a lot of great movies from the 80s. And one thing I learned by doing this is there is just a great chunk of 80s movies. And when you compare the 80s and 90s, since I did both brackets, what I found is I think drama actually is probably for your, is probably stronger in the 90s. I think you have a more variety. And so you see one big difference from 80 to the 90s bracket to the 80s bracket is we have fewer in the drama category this year. But other than that, I think comedy is really strong in the 80s. I think sci-fi, action, adventure, family, all of this stuff. Now, I'm an 80s kid. That's when I grew up, so I'm probably a little bit biased. But so how did we determine what movies made the cut? Well, we looked at a couple of different things. First of all, we looked at cultural impact at the time that it was released. How big of a hit was it at the time? How popular was it? How well received was it by audiences and critics alike? And then the next thing that we looked at was we looked at cultural impact since its release. How much has it bled into the culture? How much is it still referenced or talked about today? And so just beyond the life, has it taken on a life of its own since then? Has it influenced anything? And then finally, the last real category that we looked at was how representative is it of the decade itself, the 80s? And there is, if you were to show a movie to somebody to say, well, what was the 80s like? You could show them this movie. And so one of the things you'll notice I don't necessarily mention is quality of the film. And sometimes we look at, okay, well, these are all great movies. But clearly when we're talking about different genres of movies, certain movies, I don't know if anybody can say that you can really compare dramas to comedies in terms of quality. So we kind of took that out, and also because that helped me as the bracketologist eliminate any sort of partiality, just basically what I thought were the best movies. So with that, we have divided this into subsections. We have different regions, just like the NCAA tournament. We have a comedy region that has 16 teams in it, 16 movies in it. We have the action horror bracket, which has 16 movies in it. Then we split up in a couple of genres. We have a family bracket that has 8 movies in it, and its winner will face the winner of the romance bracket, which also has 8 movies. And then in our last region, we have the sci-fi fantasy bracket, which has 8 movies in it, facing off against the winner of the drama bracket, which has 8 movies in it as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at our first category. Now, I'm playing solo here. I am not a tech guy. So if you're used to nice fancy graphics, this is the best I'm going to be able to give you. So bear with me. But we're going to start off by taking a look at the comedy region. And as I said before, we've got 16 movies. I keep wanting to say teams because it looks like it. And here you go. So as you can see, our number one seed right out of the gate, Ghostbusters, not just one of the biggest of 1984, but one of the biggest comedies of all time, squaring off against 16 seed 9-5. Next up, we have an 8-9 matchup, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles taking on Stripes. A 5-12 matchup. These are always tricky in the March Madness, but could see an upset with the Blues Brothers versus Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Next up, we have two sports movies squaring off against each other. The number 4 seed Caddyshack versus the number 13 seed Major League Golf versus Baseball. That could be fun too. Next up, we have a matchup of the biggest box office star of the 80s, Eddie Murphy himself. His biggest hit, Beverly Hills Cop, takes the 6th seed, and then his breakout movie for a lot of people to really show more than just the comedic chops, some romantic chops, Coming to America, number 11, and of course that movie gave us Arsenio Hall. Coming in at number 3, we have National Lampoon's Vacation taking on one of its sequels in a 14 seed, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Now, I've shown this to people on my Facebook page, and I got criticized for having Christmas Vacation as low as I did. And I did that for 2 reasons. One of the reasons being that we had a lot of it provided a good matchup to put National Lampoon's Vacation versus Christmas Vacation. The other being is Christmas Vacation was right at the tail end. It came out in November of '89. It barely qualifies as an 80s movie, and I think personally more people associate it with Christmas than they do with the 80s. So, but we'll see what the team decides this Friday as National Lampoon's Vacation takes on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Next up, we have dueling high school movies, the 7 seed Fast Times at Ridgemont High versus the 10 seed Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then finally, rounding out our bracket, the Zucker Brothers squaring off with the number 2 seed Airplane taking on the number 15 seed The Naked Gun. Now, hopefully you'll see a couple of things that I did that was a little different from the 90s brackets. I did try to match up movies that stylistically matched each other whenever they could. You know, some of these might be a little bit more of a reach than others, but there is some connective tissue I think you see in most of the matchups. Like I said, not all, because I still wanted to make sure that the top 16 that should be in were in, but I also thought, you know, let's have some fun so we can try to make these first round as interesting as we can. All right. Having said that, we're going to scroll on down here and we're going to move all the way down to the action and horror genre. And this one has some heavy hitters in it, as you can see. We're starting off with the number 1 seed, Raiders of the Lost Ark, versus the number 16 seed, Big Trouble in Little China. Now, that's another one that I think could provide upset, but I'm not sure. Next up, they have 8 versus 9. Freddy versus Jason. How could you not? Nightmare on Elm Street versus the number 9 seed, Friday the 13th. Coming up next, you know I had to do this one. Number 5 seed, Aliens versus Predator. Whoever wins, we all lose. That one just seemed like a natural. Then coming up on our number 4 seed, Top Gun versus number 13, Rocky 4. 2 very distinct USA movies. Boy, howdy, do they get the patriotic juices flowing there. And 2 of the biggest stars of the decade as well, Tom Cruise versus Sylvester Stallone. Next up, then we have the number 6 seed, Lethal Weapon versus the number 11 seed, Poltergeist. Okay, you know how I said not every matchup had connective tissue? This one does not, but that's okay because both of them deserve to be in for completely different reasons. So a real clashing of styles there for both Lethal Weapon and Poltergeist. Next up, we have The Karate Kid, the number 3 seed, going up against another movie, going up against yet another movie in Young Guns featuring 2 young people. I'm just being told now our screen hasn't updated. See, this is what happens when Lou gets a hold of technology. So I'm going to take a quick second there. We're going to stop screen sharing. And let's talk first, before I guess we finish out that bracket, let's talk a little bit about the comedy bracket there. I think there's a good chance for some upsets around here, and maybe we could see, like I said, I think that Christmas Vacation versus Vacation one's going to be an interesting matchup. You know, what do you think? You think one of them is an 80s movie and one of them a Christmas movie? That's kind of where I'm leaning as well. The other thing that I think is interesting is some of these matchups that also have movies from the beginning of the decade versus movies from the end of the decade. And I think that's come into a factor, especially as we get deeper into this tournament. Also, you know, there are a couple of omissions from the comedy round that I neglected to share. That was one of the ones that kind of got grilled a lot on, was the movie Clue. And I know Clue has a huge following with a lot of people, and you know, I could definitely understand that. But at the same time, it wasn't a huge hit when it first came out. And so I felt that it, unlike all of these other movies which were successful upon their initial release, they were, you know, this movie necessarily didn't have, Clue didn't have necessarily the big cultural impact at the time. And even then, I think it's gone on to become kind of a cult favorite. Okay, so we are looking up, there we go. Now you are taking a look at the brackets for the action and horror movies. And there you see, so like, as we said, we picked up earlier with Top Gun versus Rocky 4, Ford versus 13, and then number 6, Lethal Weapon versus Poltergeist, Karate Kid versus Young Guns, 2 young heartthrob movies from the 80s. Next up, the number 7 seed Terminator versus number 10 RoboCop. That should be an interesting matchup again. One of the biggest stars of the decade, Arnold Schwarzenegger, pairing off against an iconic figure in RoboCop. And then finally, to close out the action horror genre, we have number 2 seed Die Hard versus number 15 seed Rambo First Blood Part 2. Again, another battle of these kind of iconic action movie stars. And I think this is going to be an interesting one just from the standpoint of Raiders of the Lost Ark is clearly this juggernaut of a film. It's clearly a lot of a very popular film, and it's a franchise of the 80s. It's a real staple of the 80s. And so it's interesting to see if that will have the legs to go all the way in this bracket. I think another interesting one for me is Top Gun versus Rocky 4. Which movie do you listen to? Do you watch that has really gets you going for that 4th of July holiday? Which one, what gets that patriotic? It's right in that sweet spot of the mid-'80s. It seemed like everything was part of a making America great. So next up, we are going to bring up the family bracket. And this family bracket, the family bracket is always the one that I get the most grief about, because it makes people choose between their childhood and, you know, I'm sorry, not really. I don't feel bad. You know, if I had to make some tough choices here, and now so do you. So let's take a look at the family bracket. As you can see, the number 1 seed, without a doubt, has to be E.T. It's facing off against number 8 seed in that bracket, The Neverending Story. Next up, we have 2 very family-friendly films. Disney's The Little Mermaid, the beginning of the Disney animation revitalization, taking on Muppets Take Manhattan, the number 5 seed. Number 3, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I don't know. I think that might be kind of a forgotten classic. I don't hear as many people talk about that one as much, so I'll be curious to see how it does in this tournament. But it was a huge game changer when it came out, so it's the number 3 seed, and it will take on the number 6 seed. Another kind of game changer in and of itself in Dark Crystal, Jim Henson, a dark Muppet movie. And then rounding out the family bracket, number 2, The Goonies. Of course, how can you have an 80s bracket without The Goonies? taking on the number 7 seed in Big, Tom Hanks' Oscar-nominated performance. Iconic scene with Robert Loggia playing the piano. It's got, but doesn't have enough legs to take out the Goonies. I don't know about that. I think we'll have to wait and see. Some interesting matchups on that. I know we have Scott in the chat room, and I see if we can get. I sent Scott a link. We'll see if we can get him on his takes on this. But I think we've got matchups there, and maybe a couple of upsets. I don't know. Who knows? Muds versus Disney. They're all Disney now. Everything's Disney. But we're gonna have a couple of interesting ideas coming up. Oh, look at that. This is why they don't give me tech people. I cannot be trusted. So moving on, it's going to take on the winner of the romance bracket, and we have got joining us now. Hello, how are you?
You were butchering the 80s, so I had to join in, and I'm shocked. Shocked I see that Jeremy didn't join you.
Had to get my earbuds in so I could actually hear what you were saying. But
I was making fun of you, sir.
Thank you. No, you are really entitled to make fun of me. This is,
Actually, I was making fun of Jeremy, so.
Oh, okay. Well, good. He deserves that.
As I said, I'm shocked. Shocked that Jeremy didn't join you when he said he would. I'm shocked.
Yeah. So far, before we move on to the next bracket, any thoughts? So about what you've seen, any matchups stand out to you as particularly interesting?
I'm still waiting for Masters of the Universe to pop up on your bracket, and I think it's a travesty that there are no canon films on your bracket. So we have a problem here.
Well, I apologize for that. Unfortunately,
no Cyborg, no Masters of the Universe, no Superman 4. What's going on?
I we could do a whole separate, maybe just a little 8-round 16 of canon films. I think that would be fun.
Delta
but
Force.
No, but unfortunately, for a movie to make it to the bracket, at least like 5 people had to see it in the theater.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
I think we only got to about 4 for Masters of the Universe. So
well, I'll reiterate what I said in the chat because YouTube is stupid and doesn't save the chat for future viewings. One, if Indiana Jones loses out to Big Trouble in Little China, I'm going to riot. And then also, I mentioned that Terminator versus RoboCop was a really fun SNES game. So
it was, and it'll be a fun discussion on our bracket podcast. So let's then move on then to the romance category. Like as mentioned earlier, the romance will face off against the winner of the family bracket, and we'll bring this up here in a minute here. And I think you're going to see a couple of real tough choices, especially for a first round. Here we see in the romance the number 1 seed, The Princess Bride. I don't think you can avoid that. In terms of, you think romance in the 80s, I think you gotta think Princess Bride. Facing off against the number 8 seed, being Pink, a Molly Ringwald movie. Molly Ringwald represented 3 different times in the bracket, which lets you know a little bit about how her influence. Scott, you've got some interesting things to say about Princess Bride. Do you want to get anything now, or do you want to save that for Friday?
I'll save it for Friday, but I am holding up another thing that you left off this bracket, and that you're sharing your screen, so I can't show it. Okay. But I'm holding up Optimus Prime and Transformers 1986, sir. Another one you're missing off this list. And that one was seen by more than 5 people.
Okay. Fair enough. See, you know, having you on is nice because now you can represent all of the Facebook messages that I got when I first did this bracket saying, how dare you leave out this and that and another.
I'm also the only other one from the front row, aside from you, that saw the 80s. So
this is true. You know, I think we're going to be the old sages on this, and actually to actually know to speak on the cultural impact of time, since they were all babies or not so at that point. So next up, Princess Bride versus Pretty in Pink. It's going to face the winner of John Hughes' Molly Ringwald bloodbath in The Breakfast Club versus 16 Candles. Again, that's a tough. I think that's a tough round. One of those movies is not going to make it out of the first round, which seems insane, but hey, tough choices got to be made. Next up, we got the number 3 seed.
When you brought up Molly Ringwald as a murderer in Bloodbath, I'm thinking of that movie that she was in where she was a serial killer, and I'm forgetting what movie that was now. God, now I got to find that.
Was it after 1989?
Oh, yeah. No, it's not worth it. Although, the claim to fame is she does get naked in it. That's about it. That's one reason why I saw it when I was a kid. Damn it, now I got to find it.
So, When Harry Met Sally, the number 3 versus the number 6 seed, Say Anything. Another, Rob Reiner versus Cameron Crowe. 2 pretty iconic romantic movies of the 80s. And then the last one, and this is the one that really made people mad when I showed it to them. How dare you, in the first round, make us choose between Dirty Dancing and Footloose? But yet here we are. Dirty Dancing with the number 2 seed. Number 7 goes to Footloose. Somebody asked, well, why is Dirty Dancing a 2 seed and Footloose a 7? Aren't they kind of pretty much equal? And I said, well, yeah, but no one is live broadcasting Footloose the musical on TV. So I gave it the edge there.
Did anyone watch Dirty Dancing the musical though?
I know at least Jeremy and Sarah did. They did a podcast on it, and I listened to that, and that was enough.
Because Jeremy and Sarah watch everything doesn't mean that it's actually popular.
This is true, and I'm learning this.
And I think you're missing something here when you have Footloose as number what? The screen just went goofy on me. Footloose is what, number 12? What was it?
It's a number 7 seed in an 8 seed.
Okay, good. I was about ready to say you should have made the Kevin Bacon movie a 7 seed if you hadn't. So that was good.
Yes, there you go. So he can be 6 degrees from a number 1 seed. So all right. So let's move down to our last region here, our sci-fi fantasy region, and this one I know is going to anger some people, but
raising my hand.
let's rip the Band-Aid off right now. And let's show you what we've got here for.
Before you go, this is where I have to complain every time with your brackets. I understand you're making the brackets and you're not a big fan of sci-fi, but the fact that sci-fi is regulated to a quarter of the bracket is always annoying to me.
Well, I mean, I will say, and again, it's not a bias against sci-fi, but going by the parameters that I talk about in terms of cultural impact, both when it's released and beyond, I don't know if there are, beyond what we have on the bracket, I don't know if there's a lot of sci-fi movies that you could say were huge hits of the 80s, which is more, I think, indicative of genre. I'm just trying, I'm trying to be the conduit to the people, so the people hate sci-fi. No, I will.
There's some strange Spielberg movie coming out in a few weeks that is an homage to 80s films. So,
and most of them are represented on this bracket.
Okay.
So, I will admit, I will admit, there's one glaring omission and mea culpa on this, but I still don't know which one I would kick out if to put it back in, and that is there is no Star Trek represented, and I know particularly
Wrath of Khan, what
angers you, Wrath of Khan,
and it should anger a lot of people because Wrath of Khan was a genre deciding film. It was a defining film. It was not just a Star Trek film. I think it had a rejuvenation of sci-fi in the 80s. Star Wars had the sci-fi fantasy, but Star Trek did a lot for sci-fi too with Wrath of Khan, and I think it is a glaring omission.
Again, I would agree, but you have 3 Jim Henson films on this list, which again, I love the Muppets, but I'm pretty sure we could have swapped out Labyrinth or Dark Crystal with Wrath of Khan. If you think I'd have gotten heat from the Star Trek community, I would get even more for not having Labyrinth in here. There's no way.
Your furry friends need to go find something else to do on a Friday night.
But the Dark Crystal is a family movie, not a sci-fi movie. So
okay,
again,
okay,
it's a puzzle. It's a 64-piece puzzle, my friend.
okay.
But I will say we probably could have had a Star Trek movie on here. We could debate about whether it would be 2 or 4 for that matter, because 4 was, I think, the highest grossing of the Star Trek series of that decade.
Well, it was up until J.J. Abrams' 2009.
Yeah.
So if you want to go with pop hit, 4. But if you want to go with staying power and critical acclaim, Wrath of Khan.
Okay. So let's get to the movies that we do have on this list. Brandon Davis is also very upset at me over not having The Great Muppet Caper, which I do love.
Yeah, you got one Muppet film already. You're good.
I got one Muppet film, and I had the one that I believe made more money. I believe Muppet Take Manhattan was the bigger hit. Kermit and Miss Piggy get married, and what more you need? I mean, who says
it's also a better
show?
film? Brandon and I can fight over that later.
Okay, so the number 1 seed, I don't think anybody's going to argue over the number 1 seed here, and that is Back to the Future, one of the biggest hits of the decade. Is to square off again number 8 seed, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which Pee-wee Herman himself, a pretty big staple of the 80s. That's going to be your first round matchup there. It's going to face the winner of the 4 versus 5 matchup, Gremlins versus the aforementioned Labyrinth. And Labyrinth has a passionate fan base out there, so I will be interested to see what sort of backlash they get if it doesn't make it through. Next up,
it's not going to make it through because I have a.
Next up, we have the Battle of the Burtons. Number 3, Tim Burton's Batman versus number 6, Tim Burton's Beetlejuice. Both Michael Keaton films as well. So one being way more successful than the other in the immediacy. But I think we could have a discussion, and we will on Friday, about which movie I think has permeated the culture since its release. And I think they both have for different reasons. And then finally, to wrap out the sci-fi fantasy, of course, we left out Star Trek, but we did include Star Wars. Number 2 seed, The Empire Strikes Back versus number 7, Blade Runner. Okay, let me have it for only putting Blade Runner as a number 7 seed and feeding it to Star Wars. Go ahead.
I don't like Blade Runner, so I'm okay with this. I think Blade Runner is atrociously directed, and I think it is over. People love it so much because they were told for years to love it, and they don't really know why they love it.
Okay, fair enough. I thought that was going to be a lot harder. Okay.
Now, you asked me for a list of sci-fi films you left off because, there are no good sci-fi films in the 80s. Let me begin, sir. I was typing. Aliens.
It's on there.
Oh, okay. Did I miss it when I was?
It's actually in the action horror genre. Right.
The Thing.
There. Okay.
E.T.
E.T. is in family.
Okay. Escape from New York.
Was that 1980 or 81? Was that 80?
It was 1981.
81. Okay.
All right. It was definitely a 70s flick, but it was 80. Let's see. Last Starfighter. Weird Science. The Abyss. Spaceballs. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Tron. War Games. Short Circuit.
Bill and Ted is in the comedy.
Short Circuit. War Games.
Okay.
Superman 2. You want to talk about big films of the 80s? Superman 2.
Okay. All right.
The Fly.
All right.
Starman. Airspace.
I immediately regret the decision to bring you on this podcast. But here you are. See,
I am the bracket breaker. That's my job.
You are. But again, like I said, I tell this to anybody. It's one thing to put brackets together. It's one thing to look at the brackets, another to put them together. Choices have to be made. What can I say? And the 80s were a great decade. I mean, we agree that there's a wide range of great films here. So let's close it out with our final bracket, and that's the drama. And as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the bracket that maybe is I was surprised by how thin drama is for the 80s. And, we talked about whether the 80s, the 90s was a better decade for film. And I think for drama purposes, it's the 90s. Because I think I think in the 80s, dramas got a little safe for in my opinion, and I don't think there's a lot of dramas that really hold up or that people really still talk about and share, save for the ones that we're just about to talk about, and then you can tell me where I'm wrong. You can start compiling this now.
I'm working on it actually right now. I'm typing furiously.
Fantastic. So the number 1 seed is Dead Poet Society. And no, Craig did not help me put these together. But no, Dead Poet Society gets the number 1 seed. It's a number 8 seed, Purple Rain. And I know I'm going to get grief for putting Purple Rain in here, but it was a huge hit. It spawned a huge soundtrack, aid Prince an icon. Again, I mentioned at the top of the podcast, I'm not necessarily talking about the quality of the film so much as I'm talking about the cultural importance of the films at the time.
Okay.
So Brandon says the 70s spoiled this drama, and I agree. I mean, I think you could look at the 70s were great, and the 90s were great, the 80s, and I could go into a whole diatribe as to why I think drama in the 80s took a dip, but we'll save that for another discussion. Mm-hmm. So next up is the number 4 seed Field of Dreams taking on the number 5 seed Rain Man. After that, we have a battle of Oliver Stone films. Number 3 is Wall Street versus the number 6 seed Platoon. And closing out the bracket, the number 2 seed James L. Brooks's Terms of Endearment versus the number 7 seed Fatal Attraction. It was not going to be ignored. So there you have it, Scott. I sense you have something to say.
Let's see. Raging Bull. Let me think here.
I will tell you of the 2 movies that I thought about and for this bracket and then ultimately didn't do. You hit one of them, Raging Bull, and my argument to that is I feel that Raging Bull, to go back to that qualification of representative of the decade,
okay,
feels more like a 70s film to me than an 80s
Scarface film. Doesn't represent the 80s?
Scarface shit.
Victory!
No, Scarface, I think you make an argument for the bracket because you'd absolutely be right on that one. But I don't even think it was the big hit when it came out. I think it was one of those movies that had more of an impact later on and became something that got and I remember it got nominated for some Razzie too. I don't think it was even
okay. You want one that was a big hit? How about Amadeus?
Okay, Amadeus. People still talk about Amadeus.
Yeah, we won an Oscar. I mean, frick. The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking.
the Color Purple. Color Purple. Out about Color Purple. Yeah. I went with a different purple instead.
Yeah, a badder purple, a worse purple. Stand By Me.
Stand By Me is excellent film. Could have made it in there. And the other one that I thought of that I just at the end just didn't make the cut, and it should because it's my personal favorite of drama of the 80s, which shows you I'm going to set my bias aside, and that's Do the Right Thing, which I think is a phenomenal movie. But to me, it's at the end of the decade, and it also, to me, the way Raging Bull feels more like a 70s film, to me, Do the Right Thing feels almost more like a 90s film because of how influential it ended up being and what it ended up meaning for kind of changing of the guard for films from the 80s into the 90s. So same thing with like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which I think made a big splash. It came out and kind of helped start the indie boom of the 90s. But again, because of that, it feels more like a 90s film, even though technically it was released in the 80s.
Brandon just said Amadeus won Best Picture.
It did. It did. So did Out of Africa and ending on here.
So did Shakespeare in Love, which
again, we're just Academy Awards are wonderful. We love them. We love the movies, but it doesn't necessarily always pretend to what is the best film that holds up over time. Maybe
let's ponder this for a moment. Universal Studios has been trying to relaunch their monster franchise for years, right? And now The Creature from the Black Lagoon just got an Oscar for Best Picture.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a moment. If I was Universal, I'd be really pissed off.
Well, they gotten Guillermo del Toro, so I don't know. But okay, so anything that sticks out to you from the drama bracket before we wrap up here?
Oh, anything that stands out from the actual list? I'm just going to continue to ridicule Purple Rain. I think no one liked it in the 80s. It was a joke when it came out. It was all about Prince's ego, and even when it came out, people ridiculed it and just said it was a waste of time, and it didn't make any money. So I don't understand why it's on there.
Well, I will correct you at least in one thing that I can fact check on.
Oh yeah.
In that it was a hit. It was a huge hit. Prince became the first person to have the #1 movie and #1 album in the country at the same time. So for a cultural moment, it certainly was there, and I would argue it's what catapulted Prince from just being a popular pop star to a pop culture icon. Everyone can recognize the poster, which is also the album cover. And again, it's more about the music than it is the actual movie, because I can't argue with you over whether or not it's a great film, but it also is, it also stars maybe one of the biggest icons of the decade. So I'd have to go back and I'll fact check for Friday in terms of how much money it made and the critical reception of it. 70 million? Not bad for 1984.
It is number 1,093 in all-time domestic. So,
okay, well,
70 million is actually really good for the 80s. I'll give it that.
Yeah. Yes. So
adjusted, it'd be at like, I don't know, a lot, a couple hundred.
So okay. And I think one of the interesting ones, the matchup I'm going to be interested to see when we get together on Friday to talk about is going to be that Oliver Stone matchup, Wall Street versus Platoon, because I've got to imagine that Craig hates both of those movies if he's seen them.
I don't know, because I watched Platoon a lot, so he probably at least saw it once when I was watching it, because I really like Platoon.
Yes. Yeah, I do too. I like both of those movies actually. So I'll have to be swayed by somebody's arguments there. Okay, so now that we've seen bracket, they are out there. We are going to try to get this up on our Facebook page as soon as we can, so you can take a look. You can be like Scott and rip me a new one over what I got right, what I got wrong, and give us your thoughts. Tell us what you think on our Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter at Front Row Reviews. You can follow me on Twitter at The Fake Blue Hair. So you cut out the middleman and just hate tweet me directly. I welcome it. But these are always fun to do, and I'm looking forward to getting everybody together and duking it out. We've given you a little bit of a taste of what maybe you'd expect, at least from the two of us, this Friday. What we're going to do is we're going to split into two parts, just like last week. Or last year, excuse me. We're going to do part one. We're going to do the first round because that's a lot to get through in one episode. And then the following Friday, we're going to come back and we'll complete the bracket. So we'll have time in between for you to kind of hear what we have to say and yell at our choices. So this will be a two-parter coming out later this week. Scott, do you got anything you want to plug?
No, I would. For one, I haven't done a show in a while because we're slacking off. Brandon, I see you're watching this. We probably should record something. Just thinking, maybe. But no, I said it on our Facebook page already. The 80s is the best cinematic decade. So fight me, bring it.
Good. All right. I look forward to it. And as for me, we recorded an episode of Guilty Pleasures a little bit ago that should be coming out very shortly. It's Con Air. That's March's movie. And we're doing a Twitter poll where we're going to give you the option of voting on April's episode. So at the very least, you're going to want to check that out just so you can hear what your options are going to be, so you can get on our Twitter feed and vote for that. So I think that about wraps it up for the Selection Sunday podcast. Thank you for bearing with me as my technical prowess grew leaps and bounds over the past 45 minutes. I feel like I learned a lot. So I thank you for your patience. And for those of you who are listening to this in your podcast feed, everything looked good. It was fine. So don't worry about that. So
thumbs up. Thumbs up.
All right. So for the Front Row Reviews, the Front Row Network, excuse me, I'm Lou Hare.
Until he puts out a logo, I don't even know what to call this damn thing. I'm Scott.
All right. And as always, we'll see you in the front row. All right. Thanks for jumping on.
You're still live. Yep, you're still live.
Okay.
Hit the little
stop.
Okay. Maybe it just hasn't gone through yet.